I'm Autumn Mitchell, and I arrived 17 minutes late to the Whitmore estate with the taste of metal still in my mouth from running the last block. The foyer was a mirror of polished oak and strangers' eyes. My sister's voice cut through before the door even closed behind me. Late again. Autumn. Some habits don't die. I kept my coat on for a beat longer than polite, steadying my breath. The chandelier hummed. Someone cleared a throat. I could still smell the street on my hands, rubber, cold iron, the faint oil from a wheelchair axle that wouldn't turn until I coaxed it back to life on the curb outside. A butler gestured toward the dining room. I followed the sound of silver against china and stepped into a hall washed in warm light. At the far end of the table sat a man with a soldier's posture and a stillness that made conversation falter. He was turning a small coin between his fingers, the edge flashing as it caught the chandelier's glow. My lungs forgot how to work. The coin was mine. The man was the stranger I'd knelt beside on the sidewalk only here. Everyone was waiting for his word, and he was my fiancé's father. The invitation had arrived 2 weeks earlier, printed on thick cardstock that smelled faintly of cedar, as if the Whitmores wanted their wealth to be tangible, even in the paper. I'd tucked it into the side pocket of my work bag, unsure if I'd actually go. Family dinners at my sister's fiancé's home weren't exactly my comfort zone, not when the last gathering had ended with her announcing in front of 20 guests that I wasn't built for real success. But then the follow-up call came from my sister, Celeste. Her tone was sweet enough to rot fruit. She reminded me of the dress code, the start time, and that she'd arranged for me to sit where you'll be comfortable, which I knew meant out of the spotlight. The way she lingered on comfortable made me imagine a seat near the kitchen door. I should have declined. Instead, I'd said yes, because there are moments when you can feel the ground shifting under you, and you know you have to be there to see why. The morning of the dinner, work had run late. I left the office already knowing I'd be cutting it close. And then, 3 blocks from the estate, I saw him, a man in a tailored coat, slumped forward in a wheelchair, one wheel bent inward. People skirted around him, glancing, muttering, but not stopping. I knelt, introduced myself, and got to work. My hands came away black with grease, the cold biting my knuckles. The wheel snapped back into place with a stubborn click. He thanked me quietly, voice low and clipped, as though measuring each word before giving it away. When I offered to walk him somewhere, he shook his head, flicked a coin from his pocket into my palm, and disappeared into the crowd before I could protest. By the time I reached the Whitmore estate, my palms were still faintly smudged, my hair windblown. The butler's eyes lingered on my coat before he led me in. Celeste was waiting in the foyer, one eyebrow arched. 17 minutes late, she murmured, loud enough for the guests in the next room to hear. Some of us respect other people's time. I didn't answer, because past her shoulder, at the head of the table, the man from the street sat in quiet command, coin in hand, eyes already on me. He looked different under the chandelier's gold light, but the stillness was the same. There was an authority about him that didn't need to be spoken, shoulders squared, spine straight, gaze steady. His eyes locked on mine for a second longer than was casual, and I felt the air in the room shift. Celeste swept forward, looping her arm through mine with a grip that felt more like control than welcome. Autumn, this is our father-in-law-to-be, Mr. Whitmore, she said brightly, though her voice wavered at the edges. He's early tonight. Mr. Whitmore didn't move. We've met, he said simply. The murmurs around the table stilled. My future mother-in-law tilted her head. Curious. Oh, when I opened my mouth. But Mr. Whitmore spoke first. She stopped for me on Whitaker Street, helped fix my chair. His tone was matter-of-fact, but there was weight behind it, as though this single act had filed me under a category no one else at the table could touch. Celeste's smile thinned. Well, that's nice, she managed, pulling me toward my seat. As I slid into place, I noticed it wasn't tucked near the kitchen door at all. It was 2 chairs away from Mr. Whitmore himself. Dinner began with the usual small talk, weather, travel, mutual acquaintances. I answered when spoken to, keeping my tone even. But each time I glanced up, Mr. Whitmore's eyes were on me, as if he were cataloging my responses. Halfway through the second course, he set his fork down and turned toward my fiancé. "Daniel, you've chosen well," he said, his voice carrying enough that the far end of the table went quiet. This one doesn't measure time in minutes. She measures it in what she gives away. A faint heat crept up my neck. Celeste stared at her plate, stabbing at a roasted carrot as though it had wronged her personally. The rest of dinner unfolded in muted tones. The earlier edge to the conversation blunted. Still, I could feel the undercurrent, my sister's discomfort, my fiancé's curiosity, Mr. Whitmore's quiet assessment by dessert. I knew 2 things for certain: whatever this dinner had been meant to prove about me had shifted entirely, and my sister was already plotting how to take back control. Celeste's laughter was sharper than the clink of crystal as she leaned toward Daniel's mother, whispering something that made the older woman's lips press into a thin, polite line. I caught fragments late, unreliable, always a story. It was a familiar play. Celeste didn't confront me outright. She seeded the room with quiet doubts, letting them grow in other people's minds until they bloomed into assumptions. I'd seen her do it at family reunions, work events, even our cousin's wedding. But this time, she was forgetting one thing: Mr. Whitmore was still at the table, and unlike the rest, he wasn't playing along. When the coffee arrived, he cleared his throat, the sound pulling every gaze toward him. "Autumn," he began. "Do you know why I was on Whitaker Street tonight?" I hesitated, unsure if it was a test. "I don't," I admitted. "I was there to meet someone who decided they were too busy to wait when I was delayed." His eyes slid briefly to Celeste, so I sat, and I waited for the kind of person who notices the person everyone else walks past. The room was silent enough to hear the soft hiss of the coffee being poured. Daniel looked between us, brow furrowed. "You're saying I'm saying she passed a test tonight without knowing it," Mr. Whitmore said. "Not one I set for her, but one she set for herself by the way she lives." Celeste's hand tightened around her spoon. "We all help people when we can," she said lightly, though her knuckles were white. He didn't respond. Instead, he leaned back, studying me with the same quiet intensity as on the street. It wasn't admiration exactly. It was something heavier, as though he'd made a decision about me that no one else could undo. For the rest of the evening, the conversation bent subtly in my direction. Questions about my work, my views, my background. I answered, keeping my voice steady, but inside, I could feel Celeste's glare like a heat lamp. She hated losing the center of attention, and tonight she'd lost it to me. As the guests began to leave, Mr. Whitmore asked Daniel and me to stay. His tone wasn't a request. It was the opening move of something I didn't yet understand. The dining room had emptied, leaving only the faint scent of coffee and the low hum of the chandelier. Celeste lingered near the doorway, pretending to gather her things, but her eyes tracked every movement. Mr. Whitmore waited until the last coat disappeared through the front door, before speaking. "Daniel, could you give me a moment with Autumn?" Daniel glanced at me, uncertain, but I nodded. He pressed my hand briefly before stepping into the hall. Celeste hesitated, but Mr. Whitmore's next words were firm, "Alone." She bit her lip, then turned sharply on her heel. He gestured toward the chair beside him. "Sit!" I obeyed, my pulse quickening. He rested his hands on the table, fingers steepled. "You didn't know who I was when you stopped for me." "No," I said. "You looked like you needed help." That was enough. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "That's rare." Most people only move when there's something in it for them. You didn't ask for my name, my story, or my gratitude. You just acted. I shifted in my seat, unsure how to respond. I built my life in boardrooms where people only pretend to care. He continued, "It's made me value those who act without calculation." Tonight, I saw someone try to diminish you before the meal even began. I also saw you hold your ground without lowering yourself to their level. The words landed heavier than I expected. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "I protect the people who prove they deserve it. You may need that protection sooner than you think. There are things about this engagement that may not be what they seem." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" He straightened, glancing toward the doorway, where faint voices murmured, "Not here. But when the time comes, remember what I've said, and remember that you already have an ally." Before I could ask more, Daniel returned, followed closely by Celeste, who wore the brittle smile of someone trying to mask irritation. Mr. Whitmore rose, offering me his arm as we walked toward the door. It was an old-fashioned gesture, but in that moment, it felt like a shield. Outside, the night air was cool, but my mind was burning with questions. The ride home was quiet, Daniel's hand resting over mine, as if he could feel the questions building under my skin. Streetlights passed in golden blurs, each one catching the edge of his profile. I wanted to ask him right then what his father had meant, but something in his expression told me it wasn't the moment. When we reached our apartment, Daniel set his keys on the counter and poured 2 glasses of water. "You were incredible tonight," he said finally. "Dad doesn't warm up to people easily. What you did, it mattered to him. I wasn't trying to impress him," I said, taking the glass. "I know. That's why it worked. Still." His words didn't erase the unease curling in my chest. "Daniel, your dad said there are things about this engagement that may not be what they seem. Do you know what he meant?" He hesitated just long enough to confirm he did. "It's complicated. My family, Celeste especially, had ideas about who I should marry. They thought they could push you out. Tonight proved them wrong. But that doesn't mean they'll stop." The honesty was both comforting and alarming. "So this isn't over?" "No," he admitted. "But you're not alone in it." Over the next week, I began to notice small conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Emails that took longer to be returned. Subtle comments from Celeste about fitting in. I'd seen this pattern before in my own family, the way exclusion could be dressed up as concern. Then came the first real crack. Daniel was out of town on business when I received a call from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end was polite but cool, identifying herself as an investigator working with one of Mr. Whitmore's corporate security teams. She asked if I was available to meet sooner rather than later. We arranged for the following afternoon at a quiet cafe. I arrived early, scanning the room for anyone who might be watching. When the investigator walked in, her expression was calm but direct. She slid into the seat across from me, placed a slim folder on the table, and said, "What I'm about to show you concerns your safety and your future with the Whitmore family." The folder sat between us like a live wire. I didn't reach for it immediately, sensing that she wanted to set the stage before I saw whatever it contained. "My name is Karen Holt," she said, her voice low enough that the hum of the cafe nearly swallowed it. "I work in corporate investigations. Your fiancé's father asked me to look into some unusual activity, financial, and otherwise surrounding the Whitmore family." I frowned. "And this involves me," how Karen's eyes softened. "But only slightly. Because you're now part of the picture they're trying to control. There have been moves to discredit you quietly, at first. Rumors seeded in the right ears. Background checks stretched beyond what's legal. Even surveillance." A cold weight settled in my chest. "Surveillance." She nodded. "They want leverage, and if they can't find it, they'll try to create it." Karen finally nudged the folder toward me. "Inside are preliminary findings. Some of what's here involves your sister-in-law-to-be, Celeste. Some involves others, It's not my place to interpret it for you, but I will say this: be careful who you trust. I opened the folder, photographs, transaction records, notes in clipped, impersonal handwriting. One image stopped me, cold Celeste, seated at an upscale restaurant with a man I didn't recognize. A thick envelope sliding across the table. She's been funneling information to a competitor in exchange for money, Karen said quietly. That's not just a betrayal of the family, it's potentially criminal, and she's framed you in at least one of those exchanges. The room tilted slightly, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Karen's tone sharpened. Mr. Whitmore believes you need to be prepared for what's coming. He asked me to tell you that if you're willing to act, he'll stand with you. But the choice has to be yours. I closed the folder, my pulse steadying into something colder. Tell him I understand, and tell him I won't wait for them to make the first move. Karen gave a short nod, slid a card across the table, and left without looking back. I sat there for another 5 minutes, committing every detail of the photographs to memory. The next call I made wasn't to Daniel. It was to Mr. Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore's voice was calm when he answered, as though he'd been expecting my call. Autumn, he said. I take it Karen's visit was enlightening. That's one word for it, I replied. I'm not going to sit quietly while they try to dismantle me. Tell me what you need me to do. There was a pause, then the faintest trace of approval in his tone. Be at the Whitmore estate Friday night. We're hosting a family dinner. And bring the folder. Friday arrived like a storm I'd been walking toward. Daniel was back in town but seemed unaware of the undercurrent. I didn't tell him everything, only that I'd be at the dinner. His easy smile told me he thought it would be a reconciliation. I let him believe that. The estate glowed in the winter dusk. Every window lit, every corner of the long driveway lined with expensive cars. Inside, the dining room was set to impress crystal, silver, and an arrangement of white lilies down the center. Celeste was already there, in a gown that looked like it had been tailored that morning, her smile as sharp as glass. Dinner began politely enough, the conversation skimming over travel plans and stock updates. Mr. Whitmore kept his counsel at the head of the table, his fork barely touching the food. I followed his lead, waiting. Halfway through the main course, he set down his wine glass. There's something we need to discuss as a family, he said, his voice carrying just enough weight to still the room. Celeste's eyes flickered toward me, suspicion sparking. I reached into my bag, pulled out the folder, and placed it on the table between us. Perhaps you'd like to explain these before dessert, I said evenly. The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Mr. Whitmore didn't look at Celeste. He looked at the man seated beside her, the same one from the photograph. We'll be having guests join us in a moment, he said. Investigator Holt, if you would. The double doors opened. Karen entered, trailed by 2 uniformed officers. Celeste's smile finally cracked. The room froze the instant Investigator Holt stepped through the double doors. 2 uniformed officers flanking him. Their boots made no sound on the marble, yet with each step, the air seemed to tighten. Celeste's fork slipped from her hand, the metallic scrape slicing through the stillness. This is a formal warrant, Holt said, placing a thick folder on the table. His voice was calm, controlled. Celeste Whitmore, you are under investigation for fraud, coercion, and falsifying financial statements. The table seemed to stop breathing. Daniel's hand halted halfway to his glass, his gaze darting between me and his father. At the head of the table, Mr. Whitmore didn't move, except for the slow, deliberate turn of a small coin between his fingers, the faint chime of metal against skin the only sound. Celeste tried to laugh, but the sound cracked in her throat. This is ridiculous. It's all here, I said, my tone steady as I tapped the folder I had placed earlier. Every transfer, every message, every threat. The officers moved in, chairs scraped against the polished wood. Somewhere, A guest muttered a prayer. Celeste's protest disintegrated beneath the sharp final click of the cuffs. I didn't look away, not when she passed me, not when her eyes searched mine for mercy. There was nothing left to give her. When the doors closed, silence reclaimed the room. Daniel's voice broke it. "You could have told me. I could have," I said. "But then you'd have to choose before you knew the truth." Mr. Whitmore rose, setting the coin on the table with a soft clink. "Dinner's over. Autumn, walk with me." Outside, the winter air cut cold against my skin, but my chest felt lighter. I had imagined this moment would taste like victory. Instead, it was calm, steady, final. It had never been about revenge in the end. It was about ending the lies so I could finally live free of them.